Well, these protests is not something unexpected in Slovakia because the political situation was pretty tense for a pretty long period, and there was a number of political scandals dealt with corruption on the highest level of Slovak government. There were scandals, for example, dealt with organized crime. Working with the VAT schemes on illegal VAT returns, and all the journalistic investigations were leading to the top officials of ruling political party smear. So during the last year and before, there were from time to time there were organized political protests, anti-corruption rallies, and so on. The murder of investigative journalists created a kind of point that made all this situation to boil, because in Slovakia there was kind of public consent that this country is pretty safe, and this country was pretty safe for journalists. If we recall the country's history, in 30 years there were only three cases when journalists disappeared. There were no murders, there were no beatings of journalists. The usual modus operandi were to act against journalists with the judicial way. So cases in courts, defamation cases, and so on. And the murder of journalists, and moreover, together with his fiancée, young people, 27 years old, who had no record of some political involvement. They were just professionals. Jan Kuciak was analyst who was working with open sources, open data, analyzing economic records, and creating the more wide picture of how politically tied business works in Slovakia. So there are two. Let me say that we can talk about two moments which joined. So first of all, this long period of really strong political conflict between ruling party and people supporting the opposition, and on the other hand, the moral problem, the problem of murdered young people. And actually, if a government would act more logically and more professionally, there would not be so big political crisis if the investigation was carried out properly. But unfortunately, from the very first day, the investigation was carried out in pretty improper way. This was acknowledged also by European Parliament delegation visiting Slovakia during last week, and they also acknowledged that the police investigation did not follow some standard procedures. So the other problem was that Jan Kuciak was also writing about some pretty suspicious business connections of the very Minister of Interior, Robert Kaliňák, about the police president, Tibor Gašpar, and about business of wife of the chef of National Anti-Corruption Agency. crimer. So the problem was that all these leading persons in law enforcement, they were somehow dealt with the suspicious business schemes and with the ruling party, and they were now leading the investigation of murder of journalist who was writing about their problematic connections.